Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right. Where's all the people? Gallery view. Whoa.
It's recording.
Okay. Is Ronan here today? Hopefully going to answer one of his questions. Maybe not. Okay. Are we looking good, Peter? Wait a little bit more. People are looking good. The world's going to hell and you all look so beautiful. What's up with that? Cognitive dissonance. Throwing me off my game. Look at this one, smiling and laughing. What's up with that?
It's because they're at Bonnitta Roy's Psychotechnology playground. I think that's the only reason we're all happy today.
Okay. Let's see, somebody answered. Yes, Grace. Very good noticing. Actually, it's a tendency I have to get more provocative, more angry, more challenging over time until people can't stand me anymore. And then it's time to go. So I seem to be on my, I seem to be consistent in that area. It works with my cohort because they want to get their degree, so they hang in there, but it might not be good for late night TV. But yeah, now we're going to do, actually, this is kind of a, we're going to do something quite hard today. So this is just getting us loose for that. So just start if somebody has like something they really want to throw out there in speech versus the chat, or somebody had any insight or something happened to them that played off of some of the work we've been doing. Those are always good shares. Nicholas is holding back, either that he's talking to his mom. No, we're good to go. Okay. So some people reached out to me and kind of wanted to, kind of like made some suggestions of what we might do. I know someone, I think it's Tanya, keeps asking me that I should talk about myself, which I'm not going to do, but I think Peter and I might have an interview at some point. Yeah, so we are going to talk about the dark side of meditation a little. We're going to start getting in that a little. We have three themes that I'm trying to weave together today, and we'll see which one has more energy, right? So we're going to start with three, and we can mash them up and then see where we want to go. And the three is some conversation around spiritual practices, different approaches, is kind of a critique of not necessarily the practice themselves, but the way the general population tends to relate to these practices. Some communities are more effective than others, some teachers more serious than others, but just try to talk about some common traps that basically people in our culture Westerners from the Abrahamic faiths. That's important because we tend to have a theological orientation. We tend to have a theological relationship to some of the Eastern practices. It seeps into our orientation to the work. Then I wanted to try to underscore some of the meaning making around this instead of just critique with some poetry I used for insight practice. Just kind of an alternative approach to maybe touching base with some of these important features of insight. And I also want to open up questions if they are in the space about current events and sense making around current events to make some of this practical. Now, I have been, have not yet spoken out about any of my opinions on COVID or this new round of riots and police violence. And so, yeah, if the energy is there, if we want to go toward that, use some of this towards sense making in this space, I'd be happy to look at some questions that you might have. Part of what we've been trying to do is some of these practices, if we were part of a community and we had more time together, they would be practices that help us tame our mind so we can approach talking about current events in a way that doesn't get sucked into the chaos, right? So that you see that every statement gets sucked in and makes more chaos, gets sucked into the chaos. So this would be a kind of approach that says, so first, as a community, we have to tame our mind, and then we can start talking about some of these current events. I'm going to start with a provocative statement. And the biggest problem with trying to have spiritual instruction, let's say, with modern people, let's just say modern people, is that we come to know the teachings, but we don't believe them. So we come to know, and you can hear someone parrot a million times a day, we're all one. And the first behavior they make afterwards shows you they don't believe it. This is a huge problem, and people are not called out on it. Whole communities run around expressing knowledge of many deep principles, and the first step out of the door shows you that you don't believe it. And the problem is, I think Bill Gates is working on a vaccine for this, Pradeep. So the first thing to do when you're, if you're interested in doing this work, is to touch base with what you really believe. You have to trust that it's okay to believe that. That's the problem. You enter in the spiritual community and there's already implicit sanctions. You're already trained not to say what you believe because you already know that there's like, this enters in through these walls and this doesn't. Yeah, so do they not believe but not live from that belief? I'm saying it's the same thing. I'm saying that the body believes. So if the body believes, okay, here's like, for example, the guy at Burning Man that was hallucinating and ran into the fire, he truly believed that there was nothing to harm him, or that I don't know what he was doing, he truly believed in. The philosopher that says cause and effect is an illusion doesn't really believe it, because they're still careful when they drive their car. Like, so belief is in what the body does, right? The actions show you your beliefs. And the first step is not then to try to distort your actions into what you know, but is to settle with what you believe. To settle with what is real in your experience. And any decent teacher will not reject that. The problem is, that's the cost in society, is like you get shamed for these things. But any decent teacher won't reject that. And that's part of what we were talking about last week in terms of the contracted affects is material to work with, it's energy to work with. And so these beliefs are energy to work with. Now, if you have two people in a conversation, and one person is a racist, and they know they're a racist, and they believe what they think, and the other person thinks they're not a racist, but there's some disconnect between their behavior and what they say, or they're nonviolent, then we have a formula that's very interesting here. We have unexamined assumptions about what we know versus what we believe. So this is an interesting beginning. Okay, so storytelling. So a lot of times in trying to get to understand what we really believe, things like storytelling, poetry, art, they unlock this mind that wants to know what we believe. As if you can know what you believe, the belief is the bigger, it's the larger set, right? The knowledge is, yeah. So how do we look at what is in our deep beliefs? So one of the ways to do this is through being metacognitive. We can go down that. We'll look at that a little bit. So one of it, this is just an example. It's a simplistic, overly simplistic example. So one of the ways knowledge and belief works is like this. Let's say you saw a picture. I saw this actually, I think, on the internet. Saw a picture with a child's face on the ground with a boot on its neck. Then you zoom out and you see he's got his hand in the boot, right? And so you have another different whole frame, right? Then you zoom out and you see there's a person holding a gun to the child. So he puts his hand in the boot and takes the photo op with the boot on his neck. Now you've switched again, right? Then you zoom out and you see there's a bunch of camera people and it's actually an action shot for a movie. Now you've switched again. We can go on. And this is something the knowledge mind does. Its beliefs keep reframing the perceptual experience to fit the belief. And you can do this in your own head, or you can just surf social media to find frames that slide, that more or less adapt to your beliefs. So I'm going to read a poem that talks about this. It's not a story, but we congregate around ideas like ants to a drop of syrup, not knowing that the forces of adhesion can do us in. But somewhere inside this not knowing is a fear that prevents us from moving too close and drowning there in the sweet taste of certainty. Therefore, like the ants, we set about in a swirl around the thing that has gathered us in a shape that mimics the Milky Way. Under the hot sun, the syrup runs, and small streams of sweet knowing stick to our feet, and we are forced to lick them clean or forever be held in place when the chill of evening agglutinizes us. But the memory of that sweet taste, the brain and its servants adhered to for a long, long time, and therefore, when the sap runs once again and seeps upon the ground, the ants will show up, regardless of the weather, to worship there. So one thing about a poem like this is it shows you, it's kind of humbling, because even in the realm of ideas, I mean, I think I take it literally, in the realm of ideas, we are reenacting something very fundamental and basic about how life is. It's fundamental and basic. This notion of understanding ourselves in this compassionate way, understanding how, we too are like the ants. We too are moving toward things with both desire and fear. We too can get trapped. These are very important things to us, but we have to understand that this is part of our existential being. It's it's very similar to the processes we see in nature. We need to approach this with that kind of compassion. The folly of the ants. Oh, they loved the syrup, and yet got cold, and now they're stuck. This is interesting about people. Even the shape we take around these is like a circle, like the spiraling thing. To see this in this light is to It's a different kind of framing. It's not like the framing I just told with the boy with the boot, which is like one story frame. It's kind of like tries to get down to at some level, we are made like this. That's okay. And then we can explore potentials for transformation. Mm-hmm. Does anybody have a comment? Just noticing the taste of a different approach, a different, we were working with perception and noticing in the way things are is the way we are, and not getting so carried away with how sophisticated it is in content. And it builds compassion for the living world. I once had this huge insight with an ant. I was sitting on the toilet, as you do, and I was lingering for some reason. It was at the other house, and it was a tiny house, and we had a lot of dogs. And I was looking down, and I saw this ant trying to make its way across the floor. And it was like it got caught up in a tangle of dog hair, right? So for the ant to get from here to this, like 8 inches later or 3 inches later, it had to go up this hair and then down, and it had to like go through this, and and he was just a happy little, he was just negotiating that, and then he makes it to the other side. And I felt that the sense of that, of being on the other side of that. And then I had this crazy insight, like all of a sudden I had this mental model, because I thought, the ant, it didn't come like in sequential, it just was all at once. And I thought, the ant has no idea that whole journey he had, it was just a piece of hairball on a floor, in a toilet, in a bathroom, in a little cabin in Northwest Connecticut, in a country, on a planet, in a solar system, in a world. Like the distance between the ant and my perspective, I just got this huge hit. But then I realized that there was that much difference between my perspective and reality also. And that was the insight. In the epistemic humility, some people call it. That's the insight. So the frame, the zoom level in which you address these questions is important. Now, I'm not saying that the zoom level at the highest possible imaginary is appropriate to all these things. That's like, the spiritual person who nothing, it's all Lila. Okay. I'm not saying that that's the response you should take. The question is, at what level, since you're going to frame something anyways, where's the leverage point in this? Where's the leverage point in politics today? To left-right discourse? I don't think so. I think that needs to zoom out. Where's the leverage in your spirituality today? Maybe that needs a real dive deep in, right? So this is part of the, when you're trying to know something or inquire, a big part of what's operating into your mental model or is this virtual point of reference, this virtual frame of reference from which you are asking the question. And so this is a level of conversation that is sophisticated, but I think that we as communities need to be working on, because it's a skill. It's like having a lot of tools in your toolbox, and do you want to use the microscope or the telescope or the oscilloscope? I mean, what is the appropriate frame of reference, inertial frame? What is the position that you are speaking from? I'm going to read one other poem and then talk about systems thinking. Okay, that's an interesting question. That's part of it. Pradeep is saying the frame you choose will be dependent on what you think you want to do. Right, it should be tied to, it should be transparent to your beliefs and your choice or your action. And then you're looking for what frame has the greatest leverage point. That makes me think of a story. I was actually going to tell this story. How many people saw the movie? There was a remake with Jodie Foster and Yul Brynner. I think there's an earlier version of the King and I. I think it's called The King and I. And it's the story of this kind of naive young British woman who gets a job teaching the King of Siam's children Western, English, Western languages, and Western science. Oh, Anna and the King. Anna the King. Thank you. I knew I made that mistake before. And so there's an interesting scene where the people are going to stone this woman to death for, like, I don't know, a silly reason, like, I don't even think she cheated on her husband. She just didn't want to get married or something. Or maybe she, I don't know, something like that. Anna and the King have a very complex relationship. They're like in love on a deep level, and they're very respectful. And so when this is happening, she goes to him and he says, "You have to stop it. You have to stop it." And he doesn't, and she can't figure out why he won't go out and forbid this woman from being stoned. And then eventually Anna, and he tells Anna, no, that's not how it works, I mean, this is kind of bastardizing. It's a really beautiful movie, but what the King knows is that if he goes out and says stop it, the population will know that he's adopted Western values and now he's becoming a dictator on it, right? And so he believes, he doesn't say this to her, she doesn't quite get why he's not stopping it, because she's grown to really admire and love him, and they share a lot of common Western values. And so he spends all night praying, and the mob is getting more and more, riled up, and the day of stoning to death is coming. And then she goes down to try to stop it, and that ignites it right away, and they stone the woman to death. And so the king is working with at the level of reality, of the, trying to leverage trust that the energy will blow out, that the people will resolve it. And he prays all night, and he tries to leverage the natural evolutionary potential in the system, because he knows the opposite will make it worse, right? And so then Anna is horrified because she realizes that she basically was the cause of the woman being stoned to death. So this is, I don't know why all these things fit in the same thing. It's kind of like the king has a perspective on people like we just had on the ants and the syrup. There's something, there's potential in what we have to work with. And there's potential in what we actually believe, even if, quote unquote, I know better. Yeah, these things they don't line up to an easy conclusion, but I think you're getting the sense of the space that we're working with now. Okay, I'm going to read another poem. It shows kind of the opposite. Instead of like this notion of being sucked into something that sweet certainty and being kind of adhered to it. This is kind of an opposite sentiment. It's also potential in the human condition. The path has no entrance and no exit. Still, I find myself here on it. The self has no entrance and no exit. Still, the path is shaped into becoming. When the owl soars, there is no sound. The air spreads out before him, releasing space, increasing speed. A world in motion appears. Where does this world begin? Where does this world end? Having no path is no possibility in the mind of a walker. Be like deer and follow what is not there. Having no path is no possibility in the mind of a walker. Be like deer and follow what is not there. It's kind of a koan. Some ponderous faces and some big smiles. right? So this is not something, it's not telling you something you can know. I think that's maybe why Tanya and Nathan are smiling. If you feel your mental processes, right? Like, yeah, we can force something in there. That's when we're following, I mean, it's kind of a contradiction. Then we're following a path. Yeah. Yeah, Sean.
Is this kind of related to finding out what you truly believe by I guess I want to relate this to something that I've been reading. The Way to Love describes not being able to change yourself, but rather to understand and trying to dive into like what you are and like what you believe, having the awareness I guess like give rise to the nature that actually, oh, this is really hard to talk about, but I think it's there being a no path is sort of related to not being able to change yourself and having the awareness of your nature sort of give rise to whatever happens afterwards. I don't know if you could talk around that at all.
Yeah, or someone, maybe somebody else can riff off of that. I mean, you know, it's a rich poem, so there's different nuances in it.
I'm remembering something that Nora Bateson said right now. She said, at one point she said she just found herself in the middle of things, and like of this thing, like this, like energy seemed to be gathering or like just in a situation, and she said she just didn't resist.
Yeah, gets a good sense of no entrance and no exit. Like we constantly are framing our experience in where did it begin and where did it end? And what's the trajectory and what's the path? So that's the mind of a walker. And that's okay. We have to, there's many times we have to walk. You know, all of a sudden it reminds me of Inception. It's kind of where one of the ways he describes how she can tell whether she's in a dream is because all of a sudden you're just in an experience and you don't know how you got there. And then what are you following? I mean, you're following what's not there. That's kind of literal, but for some reason I thought of those scenes because she's very playful. He gets very nervous because she's so playful with her newfound reality. Anybody else?
For me, what comes up is the sense that, you know, when you're sort of following a rhythm or a tune that only you hear, from the outside to someone, it looks like you're following a path. But when you're walking through that, you're sort of just going with the felt sense of the rhythm. And it may look like that for you once you sort of finish your life and you look back on it and like, oh, okay, some dots might connect. But in the moment when you're in it, it doesn't feel like a path.
Yeah, so there's a couple of levels of depth in there. We'll start with where you're at. Yes, but we also have a tendency to be the outsider, thinking we're following a path, right, as we're walking. So we can play that role in our own mind. And so now here's the deep one. there is no felt sense to follow. The felt sense in the action is, the felt sense and the step is the same. It's one gesture. That you think the felt sense comes first and then you follow it is the same framing, much more subtle, as that you're looking at yourself and thinking there's a path, or someone's looking at you thinking there's a path. So that's a deep frame. That's a very zoom in frame. The others are zoom out frames, right? Because you're walking and then you're retrospectively connecting the dots as if you can watch yourself and make a story. Or you're thinking of a person doing that. Those are all zoom out frames. But if you look really closely, the felt sense and the gesture are the same. In this case, the gesture being the step, metaphorically. Now you get the sense of following what's not there.
Could I share an example?
Please.
It makes me think of sometimes when I want to write something and I'm thinking, okay, I've got to write this thing. I'm like, I don't know what it is, so I haven't got my book out yet. And I never get to it. But then I'm like, okay, if I just get my book out and I just go, and then it starts flowing. When I'm in that process, then you kind of go. If you're just like looking from the outside, thinking, trying to plot out this path of everything I'm going to write, then it just doesn't really, it doesn't emerge.
Yeah, and again, we started by saying, what is a useful zoom to be in? Same thing for me writing. I have to go in and out all the time. Like, drives me crazy. It's like, throw away that frame, go in here. Throw away that's not work, So there's some kind of constant dynamic. But it is to notice not only that there are different frames, but that you can cultivate other frames. Yeah, we're on Zoom. That's interesting. It's like, I hear you there. I worked for a long time in landscape design build, and the frame of having a systemic mind and seeing on the resources here on this date, and just then we can bring the crane in, and this was like coordinating all of that dynamically was fun, and that's a certain frame. But some people ran their companies with Gantt charts and milestones, and they were too locked in, so inflexible. So this kind of complicated their stuff. So there's always, so this is like, we're investigating how this thing works. And part of this is this notion of framing and zooming and potential tension between knowing and believing. Yeah. Those of you who know integral theory, we can map it out this way. So all the perspectives can live in one frame, right? So you can zoom out and have a first, second, or third person perspective from that vantage point. Or then you can zoom in. Sometimes when you zoom very, very far in, the perspectival dimension can get smaller, very subtle. But this is like a zoom dimension to the perspectival map. So more of a metacognitive function. Okay, if you don't follow the felt sense, what is the appropriate relationship to it? That's an appropriate relationship. You're just reconstructing. There may be a little gap between the felt sense and what you do, or they may not be, and the fact that you are languaging that way, you think there's a gap. But if you look really closely and you work with the gap, the subtler and subtler distance between the follow and the felt sense, you will get very close to like spontaneous action or something. So it's just dialing into when there's no gap between the felt sense and the gesture.
I'm just gonna follow, like I'm gonna try and do the thing right now. It just because you started off asking the question like of or saying that we come to know the teachings without believing them. And that we have to, the first step is to just be with what it is that we believe. And so I'm wondering if this felt sense thing you're talking about is actually kind of like it's connected to that believing. It's like it's that thing that wants to move somewhere. And so if we can't even be with it, then we can't sense our own movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the felt sense is in the direction of what you actually believe. But you don't, an easier way to that, I mean, for real subtle stuff, yes, but another way to do that is, what does your body do? What does your body do? That's what you really believe. At that level. So you can believe all kinds of crazy things in the spiritual world, or I would say no, that's how we're using it. But your body doesn't seem to acquiesce to those truths. And so actually one could say, this is just throwing it out there, that the gap between what you believe and what you think is suffering.
Can you expand on that? That was obviously very interesting.
Yeah, so your body lives in the real world, whatever that means. Just very, I don't mean it in a big deal way. You know, it's like you have to eat, you have to shit, you fall down, something happens. There are single loop consequences. And if you think otherwise and you act by those other thoughts, you will suffer. Like most people, well, now we're playing with the words think and believe. I think we understand how we're talking about it. Like the body kind of believes it's going to die. The body believes it gets old. We're often caught in thoughts that don't agree with that so much.
But in that framing, it almost feels like we are almost slaves to the body.
Ah.
Bonnitta, are you familiar with Doug Tatteran's biomotive framework?
You know, I saw him on Daniel Thorson's watch party, and I know that they were kind of like talking about its usefulness, and I haven't looked at it, but that came on my radar just that last week. Yeah.
He's on today, I think, and doing an intro to it, and he talks about the animal kind of body brain, the intellectual brain, and then the emotional brain, and how they don't talk to each other very well because they developed at different stages of evolution, and then so we're needing to kind of get them talking to each other. Anyway, this feels, what you're talking about feels really like it's touching in with that for me.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't answer Freddie because he's just, yeah. But what's interesting, just to bring that in, you know, what was very interesting with Daniel is what people he made the New York Times. Like, you know, he goes away for 75 days in a cabin. It's not that extraordinary, but we are all but it was the timing because of coronavirus, right? And he comes out, and one of the biggest thing he said is his relationship to the body was completely changed. We had, I think, before he went in, you could say this subtle framing that we're enslaved by the body. And he comes out and he realizes that all pleasure, all joy, all perception, like it comes from the body. There's a big mind fuck that's one of the framing that we have subtly, you know, like subtly. Yeah. The mind has convinced you it's immortal, and so it blames the body for containing it. It's the primary act of violence. Your body has an existential precarity. Which means you do. And so does everyone else.
I just thought I would share an anecdote that I think is funny and kind of ties into the conversation. I during this call, like, experienced a big wave of nausea from a type of medication that I don't always have to take, and sometimes I take it wrong, and I took it wrong, and so I got this big wave of nausea, and it was just very funny to have to turn off my camera and like kind of tune out of the conversation a little bit and be like, yeah, well, actually I have a body and it's precarious, and right now I have to attend to it, and I can't be fully in my mind space. And I just thought it was like, I can't maybe hear everything that's being said, but I think I've got a transmission going on.
Yeah, so where is this stuff practical? It's really practical in education. You know, we teach children as if, you know, as Zach Stein is really good at analyzing it, as if we're designing minds. The body is completely shackled, and the things that, yeah. And so we actually, you know, that's the signal that we're given. It's just how we are as moderns, I guess. Okay, so I'm just gonna, well, can I end with one more poem? So this poem is a poem about how we order things. Like we implicitly, we know like how we judge things and our biases and prejudice, but we're talking about deeper metacognitive patterns and how we're always ordering things in our head, despite the perceptual evidence to the contrary. And it's kind of it's a lighter poem, but it was written after an experience I had watching a snapping turtle eat a duck. So it's most of these are prompted by actual experiences I've had. So I saw a snapping turtle snatch a duck in the water, pulled her down, down, down to her turtle's lair and devoured her. This upset the order of things in my head. The reptile who catches birds is a Jurassic creature. Yet the reptiles were masters of the universe back then until they were brought down, down, down by a big rock, upsetting their order of things. It was from the sky the asteroid came, obeying intransient laws as dead things do, having one purpose only, to fall down, 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 the consequences of which was a cosmic accident. Just like when the algae walked out of the sea, up, up, up onto the surface, and built a sky of oxygen, killing every living thing, but making way for both the turtle and the duck, and ordering things. What do I know? Will the ending come for us from below or above to create a new order of things from this happy accident? Okay, Peter, our exit.
Bonita, thank you again for another Psychotechnology Playground. Are we coming back next week?
Yeah, I guess.
Just checking in each week. So next week, come back for another Psychotechnology Playground, same channel, same time. We have Ria Beck coming in for Collective Presencing at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And we also have Doug Tatterin, I think that's how you pronounce his name, from what was just mentioned, the Biomotive Framework. Maybe you've taken that when you came to Toronto. Could you maybe give us a preview of what we can expect?
Yeah, definitely. Doug has like a really long history, a background in like Western clinical psychology and like traditional meditation practice and stuff like that. And a big area that he saw missing in people's like psychotechnology work kits was the emotional clearing out. He finds that a lot of people are running into the same distortions of reality that come from like these emotional wounds, even though they've maybe been meditating very diligently for a very long time. And so his bioemotive framework helps people identify core feelings and separate them out from social feelings, and then update the beliefs that are connected to those feelings so that they can process emotions fully and move on and have actually like fully experience something, so it's not like growing in your body and shaping their view of the world anymore. He's also just like the sweetest guy ever. Like even just to like have an hour of his company on a Zoom call would be a good enough reason to come by, but you will also learn a lot about your emotional system for sure.
So thanks, maybe. And then that's at 4 p.m. Eastern time. It's 60 minutes. It could be 90 minutes. I have to talk to Doug about that. We just posted an event called Trapple Perilous. And I'll read you the description. It's Rebecca Fox. She's part of the whole kind of skeptic atheist community. So Trapple Perilous is a place where we train ourselves to dissolve the barriers between us and them, to think flexibly about our own identities, and to get comfortable with uncertainty. We use playful exercises drawn from Socratic dialogue, meditative practices, and occultism, and hopefully emerge as radical agnostics capable of bearing witness to our own personal crisis of meaning. Oof. It's going to be juicy, and we're going to like look at different mottos and phrases from all these mimetic tribes, like, you know, all white people are racist, or all life matters, or even more kind of controversial ones. And we're just going to try to look at it, embody it, and see what emerges. So that's this Sunday, I think at 12 p.m. Eastern time. Yes. All right. So thank you.
Happy walking.
I will. Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Bonnie.
Okay, stop recording. Oh, there we go.